Welcome to Buddha's Healing, a quiet space where we gently reflect on the wisdom of the Buddha and learn how to soften emotional suffering, calm the mind, and grow more peaceful in every season of life. Dear friends, there is something quietly beautiful that often happens after 60, not for everyone, not all at once, but gently, slowly, almost invisibly. Some people begin carrying life differently. Lighter, softer, calmer. They still face challenges, still experience loss, still carry sadness sometimes, yet somehow peace seems closer to them. Their eyes feel gentler, their presence feels softer, their spirit feels lighter. Have you ever met someone like this? Someone older, yet strangely peaceful, not because life was easy, not because pain never touched them, but because something inside had softened. Perhaps they stopped fighting life quite so hard. Perhaps they stopped carrying unnecessary worry. Dear friends, please hear this gently. Emotionally healthy people over 60 are not people without struggles. They are not people without fear. They are not people who never worry. They are simply people who slowly learn. Some worries are too heavy to carry forever. And perhaps this is one of the quiet gifts of growing older. Wisdom, not perfect wisdom, not instant wisdom, but the kind earned slowly, through heartbreak, loss, mistakes, healing, love, and time. The Buddha gently reminded people again and again. Suffering often grows when the mind clings too tightly to fear, to control, to regret, to comparison, to things that were never ours to carry forever. And perhaps one quiet form of wisdom after 60 is learning what no longer deserves space inside the heart. Because, dear friends, the truth is this: worry is exhausting, emotionally exhausting, physically exhausting, spiritually exhausting. Especially after 60, when the nervous system feels emotional heaviness more honestly, sleep becomes lighter, energy becomes more precious, peace becomes more important, and slowly, emotionally healthy people begin making quiet decisions. Not dramatic decisions, gentle ones. They stop arguing with life so much. They stop chasing impossible standards. They stop replaying every mistake. They stop trying to control everything. They stop worrying about things they cannot change. And little by little, life feels lighter today. We are going to gently reflect on 7 things emotionally healthy people over 60 quietly stop worrying about, and how the wisdom of the Buddha softly guides the heart toward greater peace. Not because they stop caring, but because they begin caring differently, more wisely, more gently, more compassionately. Together, we will explore things such as why emotionally healthy people stop worrying so much about other people's opinions, why they slowly release the pressure to control everything, how they make peace with mistakes from the past, why comparison quietly loses its power, and perhaps most importantly, how emotional peace grows when we stop carrying what life no longer asks us to carry. Please hear this gently. This reflection is not about becoming perfect. It is not about pretending fear disappears. It is not about never worrying again. It is simply about softening, because perhaps emotional maturity after 60 sounds less like, "How do I control life?" and more like, "How do I suffer less?" Because, dear friends, peace often grows quietly, not through force, not through perfection, but through release. Little by little, worry by worry, breath by breath. So before we continue, take one slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and gently ask yourself, what have I been worrying about that no longer deserves so much of my peace? Because sometimes, the lighter life we long for begins the moment we stop carrying what no longer belongs in the heart. Dear friends, let us gently begin with the first thing emotionally healthy people Over 60 slowly stop worrying about something that quietly steals peace for far too many years. And that is other people's opinions and judgments. Please hear this gently. Many people spend decades carrying invisible pressure. The pressure to be liked, approved of, understood, accepted, to make everyone happy, to avoid criticism, to avoid disappointing others. And perhaps many people listening today understand this feeling deeply. Especially after a lifetime of responsibilities, trying to be a good parent, a good spouse, a good provider, a good friend, a dependable person, a helpful person, a respected person, and slowly, without realizing it, life begins feeling crowded with expectations. Other people's expectations, other people's opinions, other people's disappointments, other people's ideas of who we should be. Please hear this gently. Caring about others is beautiful. Compassion matters, kindness matters, relationships matter, but dear friends, living entirely through the approval of others quietly exhausts the heart, because no matter how hard we try, we cannot please everyone. Someone will misunderstand, someone will criticize, someone will judge, someone will disagree. And emotionally healthy people after 60 slowly begin learning something deeply freeing. Not every opinion deserves space inside the heart. Today, we gently reflect on something important. How much of your peace has been shaped by what others think? The Buddha gently reminded people again and again. Peace grows when attachment softens. And one quiet attachment many people carry for decades is attachment to approval. Approval from family, approval from friends, approval from society, approval from children. Approval from people who may never fully understand us. At first, this attachment feels harmless, natural even. But slowly it becomes emotional pressure. People begin asking, what will people think? Will they approve? Will they judge me? Will they understand? And without noticing, life quietly becomes smaller, safer, more fearful, more exhausting. Emotionally healthy people after 60 slowly realize something gentle. Other people's opinions are often reflections of their own fears, their own wounds, their own expectations, their own experiences. And dear friends, no heart can stay peaceful while trying to manage everyone else's perception. The Buddha never taught people to seek constant approval. He taught people to live with compassion, integrity, awareness, kindness, and quiet peace inside, because sometimes doing what is peaceful still disappoints someone. And that is okay. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with other people's voices, their criticism, their expectations, their judgments, their opinions. Eventually, the shoulders ache, the spirit grows tired. Walking through life feels heavier than it needs to feel. Dear friends, how many years have people quietly carried thoughts like, I hope they approve, I hope they understand, I hope no one judges me, especially after 60. Emotionally healthy people begin asking a different question. Does this truly deserve my peace? Because peace becomes precious. Time becomes precious, energy becomes precious, and perhaps one of the quiet freedoms of aging is realizing you do not need universal approval to live gently. You do not need everyone to understand your choices. You do not need permission to care for your own peace. Please hear this gently. You are allowed to disappoint people sometimes. You are allowed boundaries. You are allowed rest. You are allowed softness. You are allowed to stop carrying expectations that were never fully yours. Perhaps tonight, you may gently ask yourself, whose opinion have I allowed to shape my peace? What expectation no longer belongs in my heart? What would lighter living feel like? Sometimes, healing begins the moment we stop asking, what will they think? and softly begin asking, "What brings peace to the heart?" There was a woman named Patricia. She was 68 years old, living in Arizona after recently retiring from a long career in education. Most people described Patricia as thoughtful, helpful, dependable, the kind of person who always showed up for everyone else. For decades, she had spent her life trying to do things the right way, be responsible, be respected, avoid disappointing anyone. She cared deeply about what others thought, more than she realized. At first, it looked harmless. She dressed how people expected, spoke carefully, avoided conflict, said yes when she wanted to say no, smiled even when she felt tired, helped family even when exhausted, because somewhere inside, Patricia quietly feared disappointing people, especially family, especially friends, especially her adult children. After retirement, something unexpected happened. She finally had time to travel, time to rest, time to explore hobbies she had quietly postponed for years. Painting, gardening, weekend trips, long mornings with coffee, but strangely, instead of freedom, she felt guilt. What would people think? Would family see her as selfish? Would friends judge her for slowing down? Would people think she had changed? Even small decisions felt emotionally heavy. One afternoon, her daughter, Emily, invited her to lunch. While eating outside at a quiet cafe, Emily smiled and asked, "So what do you want retirement to look like?" Patricia laughed awkwardly. "I don't know." Emily tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Patricia hesitated, then quietly admitted, "I think I still spend too much time worrying about what everyone thinks." Emily smiled softly. "Mom, you've spent your whole life taking care of people. When do you finally get to take care of yourself?" The sentence stayed with her, because honestly, she did not know the answer. Weeks later, Patricia attended a mindfulness class at a local wellness center. At first, she felt unsure, too personal, too unfamiliar. But one afternoon, the teacher quietly said something that landed deeply. Many people spend decades trying to avoid judgment, only to realize peace quietly disappeared while they were trying to please everyone. The room became still. Then came another sentence, a sentence Patricia later wrote in her journal. "You do not need permission to live gently." Something softened, because suddenly, she realized how much of her life had been shaped by invisible pressure. The pressure to be approved of, to be understood, to be seen as good. But what had it cost her? Rest, freedom, joy, peace, and perhaps most painfully, her own voice. That evening, she sat quietly on the porch, watching sunset move across the sky, and for the first time in years, she asked herself something honest. What do I want? The question felt strangely unfamiliar, but also freeing. Slowly, things began changing, not dramatically, not selfishly, just gently. She learned to say no sometimes. She rested without apologizing, took a painting class, stopped over-explaining decisions, spent less time trying to make everyone happy. And strangely, life felt lighter. Months later, Emily smiled while helping her unpack art supplies. "You seem happier lately." Patricia laughed softly. "I think I've finally stopped asking permission to live my own life." And somehow, that changed everything. Dear friends, perhaps there is a Patricia somewhere inside many of us. Someone quietly shaped by other people's expectations. Someone carrying invisible pressure for years. Please hear this gently. Kindness matters, compassion matters, relationships matter. But sacrificing your peace trying to please everyone quietly exhausts the spirit. You do not need universal approval to live a meaningful life. You do not need everyone to understand your choices. And perhaps after 60, wisdom quietly sounds like this. I care deeply, but I no longer need everyone else's permission to feel peace. Because, dear friends, some opinions deserve kindness, but not ownership of your peace. Perhaps tonight, you may gently ask yourself, whose approval have I been carrying? What expectation no longer belongs in this season of my life? Because sometimes, healing begins the moment we quietly realize peace matters more than pleasing everyone. If today's reflection touched your heart, please subscribe to Buddha's Healing and continue walking this journey of mindfulness, healing, and inner peace with us. And if you have ever struggled with worrying too much about what others think, perhaps leave a gentle comment below. Sometimes healing begins when we stop carrying expectations that were never ours to hold. Dear friends, let us gently move into the second thing. Emotionally healthy people over 60 slowly stop worrying about something many people quietly spend years exhausting themselves trying to control. And that is trying to control everything. Please hear this gently. Many people do not call it control. They call it responsibility, being careful, planning ahead, protecting loved ones, making sure things do not fall apart. And often it comes from a beautiful place: love, concern, responsibility, a deep desire to protect what matters. Especially after 60, because after 60, life begins changing in ways we cannot fully manage. Children grow older and make their own choices. Grandchildren grow, health changes, retirement changes routines. Unexpected challenges appear, and somewhere quietly underneath all this, many people begin gripping tighter, trying harder, worrying more, planning more, fixing more, because uncertainty feels frightening. Please hear this gently. The desire for control is deeply human, especially after pain, especially after disappointment, especially after loss. When life hurts us, the mind quietly whispers, if I just try harder, if I stay prepared, if I manage everything carefully, maybe nothing painful will happen again. But dear friends, how exhausting that becomes, to mentally carry every possible outcome, every family problem, every future scenario, every mistake someone else might make. And perhaps many people listening today understand this feeling deeply. The body feels tired, but the tiredness feels emotional too, because carrying responsibility for everything quietly drains peace. Today, we gently reflect on something important. What happens when responsibility slowly turns into emotional exhaustion? The Buddha gently reminded people, not everything belongs to us to carry, not every outcome, not every problem, not every person's path, not every mistake. And dear friends, this truth can feel uncomfortable at first. Because naturally, we care, we love, we want people safe, we want family okay, we want certainty, but sometimes love quietly becomes control, and control quietly becomes suffering. Emotionally healthy people over 60 slowly begin learning something freeing. Love does not require carrying everything. You can care deeply without controlling every outcome. You can support someone without emotionally suffering on their behalf every single day. You can love your children without carrying every decision they make. You can prepare wisely without mentally living inside worst-case scenarios. The Buddha taught compassion, not control, presence, not perfection, awareness, not endless emotional gripping. Because, dear friends, life was never meant to be fully controlled. Imagine trying to hold water tightly in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips away. Life often feels this way too, especially relationships, especially family, especially aging. The harder we grip, the more emotionally exhausted we quietly become. And perhaps Emotionally healthy people over 60 begin realizing something beautiful. Peace grows not when uncertainty disappears. Peace grows when we stop demanding certainty from life. Please hear this gently. You are allowed to care deeply. Without carrying everything, you are allowed to rest. You are allowed to trust. You are allowed to loosen the grip. Perhaps tonight, you may quietly ask yourself, what have I been trying too hard to control? Has control brought peace or quiet exhaustion? Because sometimes, healing begins not when life changes. Sometimes, healing begins when we finally soften our grip. There was a man named Daniel. He was 67 years old, living in North Carolina with his wife, Susan. If you asked anyone about Daniel, they would probably say the same thing. He takes care of everything. He fixed problems, managed finances, checked on the family constantly, remembered appointments, solved emergencies, made sure everyone stayed okay. For most of his life, this responsibility felt meaningful, even comforting. Daniel liked being dependable, needed, reliable, but quietly, something else had slowly grown underneath all that responsibility. Exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, though he rarely admitted it. His son Andrew was 35, successful, married, living in another state. Yet Daniel still worried constantly about money, about career decisions, about whether Andrew was truly happy. Whenever Andrew made choices Daniel disagreed with, the worry quietly grew louder. What if this goes badly? What if he regrets it? What if life becomes harder for him? Meanwhile, Daniel's daughter, Rebecca, had recently gone through a divorce, and suddenly, Daniel carried her pain too, her sadness, her uncertainty, her future. Every late-night phone call stayed in his chest long after the conversation ended. One evening after dinner, Susan quietly asked, "Can I say something?" Daniel nodded. "You seem tired lately." He laughed softly. "Of course I am tired. There's always something to figure out." Susan stayed quiet, then gently said, "But what if not everything is yours to figure out?" The sentence lingered long after dinner ended. Because honestly, Daniel did not know how to stop carrying people. A few weeks later, during lunch with Andrew, something unexpected happened. After listening to Daniel give another round of careful advice, Andrew smiled kindly and said, "Dad, I know you care." But sometimes Daniel looked up. "What?" Andrew hesitated. "Sometimes I think you worry more about my life than I do." The sentence stung, not because it was cruel, because it felt true. That night, Daniel sat quietly on the porch. No television, no distractions, just silence and honesty. He realized something difficult. He had quietly spent years trying to emotionally protect everyone from pain, as though somehow, if he worried enough, nothing bad would happen. But the truth, he felt tired, very tired. Weeks later, Susan convinced him to attend a mindfulness workshop nearby. Normally, Daniel would have refused, too busy, too unnecessary. But something inside quietly felt exhausted enough to try. One afternoon, the teacher softly said, "Control often disguises itself as love." Daniel sat very still. Then came another sentence. A sentence that somehow landed directly in his chest. "You can love people deeply without carrying their lives for them." The room grew quiet. Then the teacher added, "Peace begins when we stop demanding certainty from life." Something softened inside him because suddenly, Daniel saw it clearly. He had confused worrying with helping, control with protection, fear with love, and quietly, it had drained him. Slowly, things began changing. Not dramatically, not perfectly, just gently. When Rebecca called, Daniel listened more, fixed less. When Andrew made decisions, Daniel worried less, trusted more. instead of mentally carrying everyone else's future. He practiced something new, breathing, trusting, letting life unfold. Little by little, something shifted. Sleep improved, the tension eased, the emotional heaviness softened. Months later, Susan smiled one evening and said, "You seem lighter lately." Daniel laughed softly. "I think I've finally stopped trying to carry lives that aren't mine to carry." And somehow, that changed everything. Dear friends, perhaps there is a Daniel somewhere inside many of us. Someone quietly carrying too much, trying too hard to protect everyone, trying too hard to prevent pain. Please hear this gently. Love does not require carrying everything. You are allowed to care deeply, without emotionally exhausting yourself. You are allowed to support others, without losing your own peace. And perhaps after 60, wisdom quietly sounds like this. I care deeply, but I no longer need to carry what life never asked me to hold. Perhaps tonight, you may gently ask yourself, what have I been trying too hard to control? What burden no longer belongs to me? Because sometimes, healing begins when we finally soften our grip. Dear friends, as we gently come to the end of today's reflection, perhaps the quiet truth resting beneath everything we explored is this. Emotionally healthy people over 60 are not people without worries. They are people who slowly learn. Some worries are simply too heavy to carry forever. Today, we gently reflected on things emotionally healthy people over 60 slowly stop worrying about. Other people's opinions. Trying to control everything, mistakes from the past, the pressure to be perfect, fear of aging, comparison. Things life can no longer change. Not because they stop caring, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because wisdom slowly begins asking a different question. Does this still deserve my peace? And dear friends, perhaps this is one of the quiet gifts of growing older. Perspective. After enough years, the heart begins noticing something important. Time is precious, energy is precious, sleep is precious, peace is precious, and slowly, the things that once felt urgent begin softening. The endless need for approval, the exhausting pressure to control outcomes, the replaying of old mistakes, the comparing, the proving, the worrying about things no longer changeable, little by little. Emotionally healthy people begin carrying life differently, lighter, gentler, more honestly. The Buddha gently reminded people again and again, suffering grows when the mind grips too tightly to fear, to control, to regret, to impossible expectations, to imagined futures, not because caring is wrong, but because gripping too tightly quietly exhausts the spirit. Please hear this gently. You do not have to stop caring. You do not have to stop loving. You do not have to stop trying. But perhaps, you no longer need to suffer quite so much. Especially after 60. Because perhaps this season of life quietly asks something softer. Can you care deeply? Without carrying everything. Can you love without losing yourself? Can you release what peace no longer needs to fight? Can you finally rest? Dear friends, emotionally healthy people after 60 are not perfect. They still feel fear, still feel sadness, still feel uncertainty, but something quietly changes. They stop believing every worried thought. They stop arguing with life so much. They stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world, and slowly, peace grows quietly, like morning light entering a room, not dramatic, not loud, just steady, gentle. Present, perhaps tonight, before sleep, you may place a hand gently over your heart, take one slow breath, and quietly ask yourself, what worry no longer belongs in this season of my life? What pressure have I carried for too long? What would lighter living feel like? Because, dear friends, Sometimes healing begins not by changing the whole life. Sometimes, healing begins with one quiet decision to stop carrying what no longer deserves so much of the heart. If today's reflection brought even a small sense of peace, please subscribe to Buddha's Healing and continue walking this journey of mindfulness, healing, and inner peace with us. And if there is something you have slowly learned to stop worrying about with age, perhaps gently share it in the comments. Sometimes wisdom grows when hearts learn together. May your mind grow quieter. May your heart grow lighter. And may peace continue growing softly inside you, one gentle breath at a time.